Hurricane Lee is speeding north right now on a collision course with the Gulf of Maine and Atlantic Canada. In just 2 days from the moment this video goes live, the slowly weakening hurricane will make landfall somewhere from southeastern Maine to western Nova Scotia here, likely as an upper-end tropical storm to lower-end Category 1 hurricane. But the impacts start before that. The gale force winds of about 40 miles per hour, or enough to force your arm back if your umbrella got caught in that wind, currently extends about 550 miles in diameter, and that yellow circle that denotes that will actually get larger. In addition to that, hurricane force winds are in a 150 mile diameter bubble here in that dark orange, something only observed in a mere handful of Atlantic hurricanes in recorded history. So using this graph from the National Hurricane Center, you can extrapolate how those winds look as we follow the forecasted path here along each step. Yeah, that's pretty large. But we've only just passed the 50% mark in the Atlantic hurricane season. What's coming next? Can we relax over the next 10 days or not? And one more surprise in the deck of cards. Fall-time severe weather, colloquially known as the second season, is looking likely next week for the central US. We're gonna have to start forecasting severe weather again. Meteorologist Andy Hill here at the forecasting desk. Let's talk specifics. So there is a lot to dive into here, but since we're within 48 hours of expected landfall, we can really nail down the most significant impacts given knowledge of the local topography and the places to be impacted. First off, here's a chart that shows tropical storm force winds of 40 mile per hour or greater in the bright red circles here, and hurricane force winds of 74 miles per hour or greater in these pink circles in the core. This forecast mimics that infamous cone of uncertainty while also showing how far away those wind criteria will be felt from the center of the storm's track. Breaking this down, the most important notes here are that between 8 p.m. on Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and 8 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Saturday, those tropical force storm winds will move into the vicinity of Boston, Massachusetts, Providence, Rhode Island, up the coast of Maine through Portland, Maine, western Nova Scotia, and also southeastern New Brunswick. In particular, closer to the center of the storm in eastern Maine, western Nova Scotia, and southeastern New Brunswick. The worst of the storm will likely have impacts that last about 24 hours. And that will happen through the entirety of Saturday into Sunday morning. As the storm veers off to the north and east, Newfoundland will get the impacts primarily in rainfall from Sunday morning into Monday. And that also includes Prince Edward Island. Now back over here in New England, in the Massachusetts area, your more severe impacts will last about 12 hours. They won't last as long because the storm is going to graze by. The periphery of those tropical storm force winds will graze by the Atlantic coast here, meaning that generally it's going to be quickly in and out, and you're not even going to see as much rain. However, storm surge over here continues to be one of the main problems, specifically for a select few. Around a hurricane and any low pressure system in the northern hemisphere, winds flow counterclockwise. That means as Lee enters the Gulf of Maine, winds will shift to coming out of the north and east in the Cape Cod area. And then as Lee continues further off to the north, those winds will start to come out of the north. The extended period of these northerly winds will cause greater storm surge, particularly on the northern shores of Cape Cod through Saturday, as highlighted in this yellow area here. When the winds are pointed more from the east as Lee approaches the Gulf, that's when you can expect the greater storm surge in the Boston Harbor area. So that will probably happen around Saturday morning to midday at latest. So this storm surge may not be too intense, it may not seem too intense, but remember that waves occur on top of these expected values. This is just how much the water rises on its own as it's being pushed by the winds of the storm. That will make the beaches and harbors generally less safe to be around in the immediate vicinity, especially when rip currents are still going to be possible throughout this entire period. And I do expect similar storm surge values to occur over in Atlantic Canada as well. Now, in terms of that exact landfall location, my personal forecast given recent model trends is a pass very close to Yarmouth here on the west coast of Nova Scotia, and if it doesn't quite make landfall in Nova Scotia, it'll probably pass pretty close to St. John in New Brunswick as it curves off to the north and east. So that'll happen with that trough that's over here that's going to carry it off in this direction. Given this, I think a U.S. landfall is just barely possible on the furthest eastern extent of Maine. But regardless of where in this 50 to 75 mile stretch landfall does occur, the good news is that as this hurricane touches grass, there are a few factors steering Lee that will slow it down in the cold waters of the Gulf of Maine before it gets closer to land. And that will sap a lot of its energy right before landfall. So first off, in analyzing that, here's the Weather Prediction Center map that shows our big old cold front here along the blue line that brought brought a much nicer couple of days to the southeastern states. This same cold front will merge with the hurricane here and turn it extra tropical, as you saw in the thumbnail. What that means is that at this point on Saturday, Lee is not going to have any semblance of an eye of a hurricane, but rather it's going to have its own cold and warm fronts here. The weather prediction graph shows this warm front extending out of the storm and to the north here, indicating that winds are driving warmer air into a cooler air mass off to the north. Generally, this extra tropical transition would speed a hurricane up, but there's a sneaky factor at play here. Hurricane Margot is sitting out here in the central Atlantic, not going anywhere for a while before it gets eaten up by the jet stream as seen in this animation. But while it's out there, it's actually having an effect on Lee's path, just like the possibility I discussed in my last video on this topic. Its outflow and winds are acting to drive a small blocking ridge, and that's being pushed to the west from the outflow of the hurricane, just like this. So here's our ridge right here. You can see it building out ahead with these bumps. This is being pushed into the Gulf of Maine, and it's actually going to drive Lee a little bit to the west before it curves back to the northeast with the trough, which is located right here. Because this ridge midday Friday is actually to the north of Lee, it's building into the Gulf right here, and that's going to make Lee slow down, as some of the winds as a result are actually being driven more to the south toward Lee, pushing it away from the bay just a little bit. As Lee approaches land, however, that ridge is well forecast to break down as it pushes out of the way, and Margot loses a bit of her strength and thus her grip on that ridge as well. Looking at this chart of expected intensity of Hurricane Lee from here on, a lot of models drive a stake right into that hurricane and reduce its speeds dramatically. And they think it's going to be a disorganized mess as a result of the trough interaction that we're talking about. So we saw the ridge on one side of it, but we also have that trough that's the main actor in driving it along to the north and east. The models are not the best at handling these dynamic situations in particular. My personal forecast is for Lee to be at least upper end tropical storm force, if not very low end Category 1 hurricane as it enters the Gulf of Maine up here. This is because the wind field around it is so large that Lee really isn't all that much smaller than the trough that's dragging it up to the north. When a storm is generally the same size as the trough in question that's dragging it up to the north, they really work synergetically rather than destroying each other. And the National Hurricane Center is forecasting the storm to not lose strength quite as rapidly as some of the models show here, pretty much for exactly that reason. The next thing we'll examine here is all the rain that's going to come from Hurricane Lee, as water-related impacts are still going to be the most significant part of the storm. As seen on this map, some areas of New England have gotten 2 to 5 inches of rain over the last 7 days in particular. This definitely extends into the New Brunswick area as well. So, wherever the heaviest rainfall from Lee occurs around the center of its path here is going to spell the most concern for flooding. The GFS model shows a band of 2 to 3 inches of rain around the center of the path, or 50 to 75 millimeters, where constant on and off moderate rain will accompany those winds over that 24-hour period we discussed. Similarly, looking at the Euro model here, we see that 2 to 3 inch band, maybe a little bit heavier as well, and also a little bit further west into inland Maine. So some slight track uncertainties exist here, but again, it's within that 50 to 75 mile core difference. Both models have a sharp gradient, or fall-off of rain here, right as you get to the New England coast near Boston. It's possible y'all on the coast won't see more than a quarter inch of rain until you get up into the coast of Maine near Portland. Thus, I think the worst flooding impacts are shown relatively well by this map, where eastern Maine, much of western Nova Scotia, and also New Brunswick, where all of that rain has fallen in the last week, will see the greatest impacts of flooding, where saturated grounds are not going to be able to absorb all of that water that's being dumped on them in a 24-hour period. So I hope you all have your hot beverages ready for a day of dealing with this hurricane if you're near the path of it. If you're near the path of it shown here, but also remember how far away those winds extend from the cone of uncertainty. Thus, expect a high amount of power outages from the coast of Maine into Nova Scotia due to the variety of factors we discussed. It could be any one of them that end up taking out the power, so you should be prepared for that. Now, this storm is forecast to be much weaker than Fiona last year and Dorian a few years before that in the areas that are going to be impacted. But I encourage you to share your perspective from those storms in the comments below the video, even if you weren't in the direct line of impacts and you experienced something indirect. I think that opens up a nice avenue for people to understand multiple perspectives of people who have ridden out these storms in the past, especially those less direct impacts like maybe a prolonged power outage. Seeing all of these maps I'm showing you in the video and living through the storm are two entirely different things no matter how we slice it. So I want to make sure I offer both things here in our corner of YouTube. But guess what? I'm not done talking. Because once again, we've only just passed the 50% mark in our hurricane season, and there is another beast ready to juice up the Atlantic Ocean here. This storm has a very high likelihood of forming and becoming Nigel, and Hurricane Nigel at that. The lowdown is that as it stands, the biggest threat this storm will pose in our forecast window of about a week and a couple days is nearing the island of Bermuda, which is just off the screen right here. Once again, y'all will have to deal with another tropical system getting pretty close to you. So to do some analysis on the path of what will likely become Nigel, we have to first see this next trough here that's located over central Canada currently. So this trough over here in central Canada will also propel Lee forward after it's already degraded, and it will progress to the east over the next week into September 19th and 20th. Out ahead of this trough, it's going to completely wash out the winds, which at that same time frame is going to create this big old anticyclone here, an area of high pressure, rotating clockwise. So in particular, this high pressure is actually going to drive winds outward while also rotating clockwise, meaning the wind field over future Hurricane Nigel, which you can see going to the north right here around September 20th, those winds are going to be out of the north and northwest. It'll be these winds that steer it out to sea, with its closest approach to the island of Bermuda being around September 19th to 21st timeframe. Thereafter, Nigel will get sucked into the jet stream, going way off to the east, just like Lee and Margot. Down the line, that could bring some unsettled weather to Western Europe, the UK, and Ireland about 10 days out from now. So we'll have to wait and see how that evolves. And back here in the States, we're about to enter our second severe weather season, fall. Now, fall is typically much less active than springtime here for severe weather and tornadoes. The most basic reason is that we need colder temperatures miles up in the atmosphere in order to generate instability and thus cape for those storms to gobble up. Now in the spring, that cold air is typically being sourced from Canada and also over the Rockies, and it's had all winter to chill out before it gets dragged down to the south by those big-time low-pressure systems that ramp all that warm and moist air up out in front of them, but also bring down that cold air back to the north and west. But in the fall, this same air mass has been cooking all summer long, especially areas that see sunlight from 16 to 18 hours or more every day. That makes it harder to get cold enough air, but it does still happen when the air is very dry. Less water in that air that's dry and pretty far above our heads will make it so that it can cool off faster, enough to promote severe weather. We call that the elevated mixed layer when it's also warm and humid at the surface out in front of it. This is the ingredient mixture that's going to give us those supercells and really strong, powerful windstorms that look like straight lines. And guess what? There it is, showing up in the Great Plains next Thursday and Friday. September 21st and 22nd in particular. The SPC has yet to highlight an area here as we're far out from the day of, and confidence is low exactly what the timing of day will be. But confidence is high in some absolute leaf buster storms here showing up in the Great Plains, both supercellular and linear, and that means that all severe hazards are also on the table. Thankfully, the leaves aren't changing colors out here yet in the Central Plains, so we're not going to lose our fall brilliance. But y'all in the Central Plains should have a nice heads up a week in advance, as there will be some changing weather next week due to this monster. And there are several different solutions possible with the progression of this trough too. I showed the GFS just then. The European model here actually combines another trough off the coast of California, and that could deepen it a little bit more. And as it does deepen it, it also could stall it out just a bit more, meaning we could have a couple of days of severe weather possible as well in this particular solution. However, this is many days out, so we don't have a clear picture. Once again, that's the reason the Storm Prediction Center hasn't highlighted an outlook risk area yet for those days. And of course, the notion of changing weather is backed up through the Climate Prediction Center graphs for temperatures and precipitation next week. Higher temperatures are expected where a low pressure drags all that warm and moist air to the north, even as far north as Minnesota, well above average temperatures into September in the mid-80s Fahrenheit up here. And above average precipitation can be seen in that same area, where generally we're going to expect severe weather in this vicinity, and probably some widespread mild to moderate rain on the northern edge of wherever this low pressure sets up. Interestingly enough, a drying out period is in store for the northeast and southeastern Canada next week as well, after all of our current events over here are said and done with. So we'll see how this severe weather threat forms coming up next week. Thanks again to the Lightning crew here for joining this channel. You can join the channel yourself if you appreciate what I do here by clicking the join button below the stream. If not, that's totally cool as well. I'll see you in the next one.